this lecture. Alright, so I kind of want to continue the conversation from last week about at least what I think Buddhism is, right? And then what some of the stuff that I'm reading is saying about Buddhism, right? And if you recall, when I'm talking about Buddhism, it's about cultivating wisdom, right? Wisdom to do what? What do you need wisdom for? And there's only one thing, right? And it's the wisdom to learn to let go, okay? So, and then I thought about this myself. I'm like, okay, if Buddhism is all about this, like cultivating wisdom to learn to let go, why do we have to walk down this path at all? Why let go of cravings? Why let go of clinging, right? And I thought about this. It's like, what's so bad about this to begin with anyway, right? I mean, what's wrong with fame? What's wrong with money? What's wrong with anything that you ever wanted, right? Don't people in life like strive towards these things anyways? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with walking down this path? And then I came across this idea. It's mentioned multiple times in the Diamond Sutra, right? It's this word sunyata, which means emptiness. And it's like really fascinating. I'm like, okay, why is it that in Buddhism that they're talking about this word? Well, the answer is this. It's because all things are empty. That probably has no meaning, so I'm going to repeat it one more time, right? All things in life are empty. Now that statement is a very bold statement. It makes no sense whatsoever. When I say like all things are empty, what's that supposed to even mean, right? And so that statement is designed to answer the question of why should we not cling to our reality, to the experiences before you, okay? But I'm gonna have to take it back a little bit because I need to talk about a topic that I'm sure your parents talked about before, and that is drugs. Yeah, drugs, right? I'm sure your parents have told you, don't do drugs, okay? So my question is this, and if they haven't, then you guys need to have that conversation. But my question to you guys is this. 3 things. What are drugs? Why are they bad? And why do people use it to begin with? Keep in mind, right, there was a lecture I did like well, not years ago, like months ago, about the 6 paramantras. And one of them is that you shouldn't be consuming intoxicants, right? So drugs are considered intoxicants, that's bad. But for the sake of this discussion, my question is this, right? First piece, you guys kind of know what drugs are, right? But you guys kind of don't know what they are really. So what are drugs? In a broad sense, they're just chemicals, right? All the types of drugs that you guys know, they're just simply chemicals. What do these chemicals do? They have a name, right? It's called neurotransmitters. And what they do is they find the parts of your brain that feel like really pleasurable. And when you take drugs, when you consume drugs, what happens? It activates those pleasure centers of your brain, so you feel really, really good. That's like what drugs do, right? That's what drugs are. So, if you take drugs, or people who use drugs, what happens to their brain chemistry, right? What happens? The chemicals make them feel good, but then at some point, it dries up. And then what happens when the chemicals of the drugs dry up? They crash, right? Their brains crash and they feel bad again. Or whatever their reality is at this point, if you take drugs, right? It kind of like makes you feel better. And then when the drugs fade, you go back down here, right? And then these people feel bad. So if you're at a state of feeling bad and drugs make you feel good, and then once the drugs dry up, you feel bad again, your natural tendency is to want to take it some more, right? And this is how addiction is created, right? This is why drugs are bad. It creates addiction because you crave that same experience again. You're having this like craving sensation. And the question is, who are these people that use drugs to begin with, right? Well, they're people who just don't like their reality. They want to escape their reality. They don't feel good about themselves, so they need some external stimulants, right, to affect their brain in a way that makes them feel good, okay? So that's what drugs are. Now, my question is, right, what do we know about the reality of these drug users? Like, from our standpoint, is the pleasure that they're getting from using drugs real? Or is it really an illusion, right? It's mainly fake. It's mainly fake pleasure created by chemicals, right? It's not like real happiness. It's not real pleasure, right? It's just simply an illusion, right? And the only way that we are able to differentiate and say, oh yeah, that stuff that they're doing, when people are like high and stuff, they're experiencing an illusion. We could only really understand that because we are in a place where we are healthy, right? And only healthy people can say, oh yeah. Or healthy people has this wisdom within them to say, oh yeah, these drug users, something's messing up, something's wrong with their brains. They are craving something and clinging on to something that's really, truly empty. And so, and keep in mind, right? Addiction to drugs creates like destruction, creates suffering, right? And so, the whole discussion that I just had about drugs is really an analogy to what I just said earlier, which is that all things are empty. And the idea of emptiness is really big in Buddhism, right? You could look it up. It's referring to like the void, or like, yeah, the void implies like a certain level of emptiness. But it's a very difficult concept, but I just kind of wanted to explain it anyway because it's kind of important to really understand. So let's continue with this. So what is emptiness, right? Emptiness is a mode of perception. It's a way of looking at an experience. Just very much like the way that we are able to look at drug users, we kind of need this idea of emptiness first to look at reality as it is. Let's step back, because here's the big question, right? What is our drug? Believe it or not, and this is why like Buddhism is so hard, right? And I just thought about this earlier, because some famous person said that religion is the opium of the masses, right? That people get addicted to religion, and so that they're not confronting like their current reality. But and this might be too high level, but what if it's quite the opposite? What if your reality is really a drug that you're on, and you need to wake up to what the real reality is? Or, okay, that's a little bit complicated. Whenever you're in a dream, do you ever get an opportunity to say, wait a minute, I'm in a dream, none of this is real? I don't think so, right? Because when you're in a dream, everything seems so very real. Like, have you guys ever had dreams of being chased before? Yeah, right? People always get like chasing dreams or whatever. But you don't know that you're in a dream or not. You just know you're being chased and your body's reacting, blah, 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 right? Anyway, that's, I'm trying to like explain this idea, but I need to actually read more about this. Yeah, question?
If there's different religions, doesn't that mean that there's different realities?
If there are different religions, doesn't that mean that there's different realities? That's a good question. Okay. Different religions have different interpretations of reality, right? But the question is, are these interpretations actually reality? Does that make sense? So it's like, But then again, like what's the purpose of religion to begin with? They're all pointing to the same path, right? Like salvation, saving yourself, etc. But that's a good question. I do want to come back to it, but I don't think, because there is like, if I ask you guys like, what's the color of this plant, right? Depending on like whether you have glasses, whether you have sunglasses, whether you can see, whether you're colorblind or not, you could all look at this and name it a slightly different color, right? But ultimately, there is a true reality, isn't it? This does inhabit like one specific type of color. Does that make sense? So, yes, different religions have different interpretations, but then the question becomes which religion A has the claim to the true reality, and then which one has the closest interpretation of what is the true reality, right? And so that's something for you to think about. Okay, let me go back to this thing. On any topic, any given topic, right? Your mind has a certain tendency, and the tendency is to construct stories, worldviews, and anything about any topic. Like, so if I say a certain word, the one word I'm going to say, all of a sudden your brain, maybe like 3 months ago, maybe like 4 months ago, if I said this word, your brain would have like no idea. It wouldn't be able to construct any stories, any knowledge. But if I'm going to say this word now, and then all of a sudden a million thoughts are going to rush through your brain, right? Because you kind of know something about it now. The word is coronavirus. Okay? All of a sudden, all the news stories, right, about corona, all the deaths, etc., start rushing to your mind. You understand, like, oh, there's a pandemic out there in the world, you know, started in China, etc., happened in Italy, Iran, and now it's in the United States, right? But every single topic, right, that comes to mind, there's always like stories and worldviews that like come up along with it, right? No word that I mentioned or no topic that I mentioned is just like empty, right, in your brains. And so our brains, right? Oh man, it's a far complicated topic, but our brains tend to make like mental shortcuts of the world, right? And so all the information that you guys have about like certain topics, it's because of your experiences. And the experiences just come automatically. It's part of like how your brain functions, right? And it's kind of like useful for survival. But what the Buddha found out was that like your brain racing, constructing all these other stories about certain topics, it pulls your attention from the present moment, from reality, right? And what he finds is that if you're not like mentally strong enough and you don't have that wisdom, you kind of get lost in your thoughts. And to some extent you get addicted to it. And so, like, have you guys ever like stared out into space before? Maybe even during this lecture, you know, or several lectures in the past, you just stare out into space, and then the thoughts created more thoughts and more thoughts and more thoughts, and then all of a sudden 5 minutes has passed by and you're like, whoa, what happened? Like, where am I? Type of deal, right? Anyway, that's just an example of how like your brain sometimes takes you places, and then you don't realize where you are. Like, you're living either in the past when you're thinking about like past stuff, or you're living in the future thinking about future stuff, but you're not really in the present moment, right? And so here's an example of this article that I was reading, and it kind of fills in this idea. Say that you're like just sitting there meditating, right? Meditating, and then suddenly emerge from you is like this feeling of anger, right? Towards, let's just say, a friend. Because you realize, oh yeah, this friend did something wrong to you, okay? And then, I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but what does anger do to you guys? It does one thing, which is it hijacks your brain, right? Anger, especially when you're in the heat of the moment and you're very angry, kind of hijacks your brain. And that's why certain people tend to like black out, as in like they do stuff out of rage and they don't even know what they're doing, right? So anger has this effect, okay? And it makes you say this one statement, which is, I'm angry, right? I am angry. And what is it that happens when you are angry? Well, your brain creates stories, right? And it elaborates on these stories, which generates your feeling of anger even more, right? And what the Buddhist perspective is saying is that these stories and these views about the anger itself creates more suffering within you, okay? And the more that you entertain these thoughts about like anger to begin with, the more distracted you are from seeing like the root cause of it, okay? So the example is like, you know, the expression of like walking down a rabbit hole, right? Sometimes like you're walking too far down, you don't even know why you entered that rabbit hole to begin with. Like why are you walking there in the first place, right? So you're just like ultimately like sitting in this pool of anger. And this is like what most Buddha's experiences are, right? And what the Buddha says is this. He says, if you find the cause of suffering, you're actually able to end it. But the question is, how do you end this cause of suffering of anger to begin with, right? And he says like the root cause of all this is coming from the word I. I am angry. If you're able to actually detach yourself from the I part, that's how you begin to start not getting so angry, right? And this is like the beginning of what they call the emptiness mode, okay? So what is the emptiness mode? It's when you're able to step back a little bit and actually not react or act with the anger or identify with it, but simply observe it for what it is, right? And then when you begin to just observe like the trait of anger, you begin to see how empty it is, right? Yeah. You can begin to see that anger is empty of anything to identify with or possess. And so this allows you to say that anger is silly and that it's not allowed to hijack your brain. I need to like step back a little bit because I feel like this discussion, I had it in my brain, but that it's not there. Okay. What I'm trying to say is this. People who are angry don't know they are angry. They just experience anger. Okay? That's it. What the idea of emptiness is about, it's a mode of perception. It's a way of saying this. There's the person who's angry, right? And there's you. If you're able to step back and just look at the anger for what it is, you begin to realize that anger is simply something that's empty. And once you are able to arrive at this conclusion that it's empty, it kind of has no power anymore. You're able to let go of it, okay? And that's the main idea, okay? So I don't know if you grasped it or not. It's kind of slightly hard to grasp, and I don't have mastery of it myself, but I think it's an important like part to just like bring up for now. Okay, and so I kind of needed this discussion, or at least needed for you guys to understand that once you begin to see that this emotion of anger is actually quite empty in itself, but if you attach yourself to anger, guess what happens? It creates more suffering, right? And it creates more stories, more viewpoints, etc. And it's just constructing, it's like, it takes on a life of its own. But if you are able to detach yourself away from it and say, oh, this is anger, and you don't resist it, you just let it run its course, to some extent, you're able to let it go, and you're able to see that anger is truly empty. Now, yeah.
If we're supposed to separate ourselves from anger, do we also separate ourselves from like other feelings?
Yeah, to some extent, yes. To some extent, and that's what, like, really the idea of Buddhism is about, right? It's, can you start peeling away these things that don't serve you any real purpose, but really they create more suffering. The next big thing after anger is greed, pleasure, things that make you, like fame and fortune, right? Can you look at it, right, from this mode of emptiness and say, that's actually fake, that's actually an illusion, that's actually empty. I don't need this. And that's what the idea of Buddhism is trying to teach you, right? It's trying to like get you away from greed, anger, greed, and delusions. Can you peel yourself away from all these things? And so it's very much like drugs and drug users, right? My initial analogy. Can the person who's using drugs peel themselves away and say, wait a minute, even though this is bringing me pleasure, it's fake, it's empty, right? And so this is why like discussing this topic is kind of slightly hard, because it takes a certain level of cultivation of wisdom to begin to understand it. Here's what I wrote. It's like, why do we say don't cling to like fame and fortune? Because even though they're like very physical in nature, if you step back, you're able to actually realize that those things are really truly empty, okay? And yet people crave it all the time, and their craving creates more suffering, right? How many poor people out there want to be rich? How many, middle income people out there want to be rich, right? But then how many rich people, despite being rich, have problems within themselves, right? It's just a never-ending cycle. And so what Buddhism says is like, hey, you can escape this cycle, but it's a matter of can you arrive at this understanding and start seeing things, perceiving things as they really are, okay? And then one day, when you do see things as they really are, you're able to actually let it go. And that's why, that's what the interesting thing is, right? And I started this last week, that Buddhism is really cultivating the wisdom to learn to let things go. And when you do this, when you learn to look at things, right, and let them go, you experience you get to a different level of experience that's a little bit deeper, right? It's not superficial like money. It's a little bit deeper. And within that deepness, that's when you feel like truly free. Like free from stress, free from suffering, right? And it's like a certain level of like tranquility. So let me conclude this very quickly, and then maybe I'll take some questions. There's a lot of Buddhist like stories out there, and the Buddha himself told a lot of stories, right? And he never quite referred to anything, he never mentioned the word of emptiness. But like most of his stories are about how people suffer, right? And why is it? And then in most of his stories, next time I'll bring those stories up. The reason why most people suffer is because of their lack of perception, or their unskilled perception of the reality of things, right? And so freedom from suffering comes from being more perceptive. That means growing more wisdom, right? And ultimately, all of the Buddha's teaching is about, it's aimed at getting people to focus on their perception and enter into this like level, this I like to call it, or at least this is what they mentioned, emptiness mode. Because emptiness mode begins to say like, okay, this, and this, it's actually not true, okay? So I shouldn't be stressed out about it. And so the emptiness mode is simply a tool for you to really like detach from, or loosen up from the attachments to like the views, the stories, and the assumptions, right? And then if you're able to detach from all these things, you have a space in which you empty your mind from greed, anger, delusions, etc. Right? All the vices that the Buddha says, right? And that's pretty much it. So any questions? Yeah.
So if we think we're happy through fame and fortune, but really we're not because it's empty, then would we actually find like real like happiness through like understanding like religion, like the reality?
To some extent, yes. I think, and it's let me tell you this much right now. I think if you believe the opposite, if you believe that money is going to give you so much happiness, I kind of want to suggest for you to like walk down that path, right? Because the opposite is certainly not true. The opposite is saying that if you have, $10,000 right now, you'll be happy. And then, what does that create? It creates more craving, right? Because all of a sudden you want 100,000. And once you have 100,000, you want 1,000,000, etc. And then you kind of develop this like insatiable thirst for more. But if you are able to step back, what does getting money do? A, it creates thirst, right? Greed. But that greed creates more suffering, right? And more stress. Stress, suffering, greed, right? And so, if we know that that's not the route, right? What is the alternative? If you learn to let go of it, maybe. Can you repeat your question one more time? Because I think I missed it. But I kind of have an idea. One more time.
So if like fame and fortune doesn't actually make you happy, would like understanding like religion or the reality actually make you happy?
That's a good question. I think, have you ever noticed how monks are always like smiling and they're so peaceful and serene? Like, have you ever seen like an angry monk before? Or like, question that yourself. Why are monks, the ones who meditate, the ones who practice this religion, so happy? Even if you notice like the Dalai Lama, right? Why are they so cheerful in nature? Once you give things up, you don't need anything, there's nothing that can hijack your brain, right? There's nothing that can bind you. But if you're not ready to buy into that yet, and that's where I find myself to some extent. I understand where you're coming from. If you're not ready to buy into that, it just takes more time. Yeah, I'll speak to that more like next time I speak. But it's a really interesting question. Sometimes I ask that question to myself. It's like, my question has always been like, why dismiss this reality as an illusion, right? When it's so physical. But I think time and time again, if you keep thinking about this, and the older you get, the more you experience things. Ask the older people, maybe that you know, what they think about like money and what it ultimately means when you're like at 80 or 90, right? When you're young, sure, it has a lot of meaning, but when you're like 80 or 90, all of a sudden you can see the level of superficiality that it creates, right? And then all this time, you realize, wait a minute. Or at least by the time you get to that advanced age, you begin to say, wait a minute, this is actually not, it wasn't that important. And yet I made it my whole life for it to be important, right? And a lot of people with like careers in like investment banking and stuff like that, they make a lot of money. But the number one advice that a lot of old people give to young people is that like, find a career that's meaningful, that gives back, right? Or yeah, something to that extent, right? And the question is, why is that the number one advice? Why isn't the number one advice, especially coming from 80 and 90-year-olds, go seek money, go seek fortune and fame, right? Because the people at that age, they've seen it all, they experienced it all, and then now they've arrived at the place where their wisdom says, none of this actually truly makes you happy. But I think happiness is I wouldn't say that Buddhism says if you study this religion you become happy. It's let me tear away, let me peel away all your suffering. What's left is what's left, right? But I think when you peel away suffering, the true nature of yourself is very joyful, it's very happy, right? So, that's it. Got it? Or, I'll explain that in some more. Okay, awesome, thank you.